You are live.
All right. Good morning, everyone, to all of our panelists and whoever else may be joining us either on YouTube Live or via Zoom. We're so excited to be able to study the Word of God today through the Spirit of Prophecy in this incredible book, Patriarchs and Prophets. My name is Marvin Lee. I'm currently serving as the head elder at Eastside SDA Fellowship, and I'll be facilitating today's panel. And I'm going to ask the rest of our panelists to introduce themselves to those who may be tuning in.
Hi, I'm Christos Palaskas. I used to be a member of the SDA Church in Kirkland for a couple of years before I moved in Puyallup, and I'm so happy to be virtually here together with you so we can study the Word of God together.
Hi, I'm Damon Harris. I go to Eastside from Detroit, moved out here 2014, then came back in 2016, or to move out of 2014, came back in 2018. So yeah, glad to be here.
All right. Hi, I'm Peter Rowe, and I'm a member of Eastside SDA about for 8 years now.
Okay. Well, for those of you who had an opportunity to read this chapter 72 in Patriarchs and Prophets, I hope you enjoyed it. I did. I also read the 7 corresponding chapters in 2 Samuel, and I tell you, it was gripping action, adventure, drama. I was thinking, hey, Game of Thrones and House of Cards, shows like that, just, have nothing on these chapters because talk about palace intrigue and revolution and revolt and family drama of all sorts. This chapter had it all. So there's a lot for us to cover today, and I'm excited to review this chapter with our panelists. From time to time, I may reference some additional detail that were provided in the actual books of 2 Samuel, especially in our second question of the day. But we'll jump right into this because there's so much to discuss. The first question I'll read out, and then we're going to have Damon start with that response. The first question is this: the rift between Absalom and David began with the incident between Absalom's half-brother Amnon and his sister Tamar. What parenting dynamics led up to the violation of Tamar and Absalom's murdering of Amnon?
Yeah, so you have David, who is king, and he's being a pretty good king, but he kind of loses pulse of what's going on in his house. And so you have his sons and lusting after his half sister and everything, and just morally children are kind of misconstrued and off. And so you see David where he doesn't have a good handle on what's been going on. And so Amnon rapes his sister, and David does nothing for 2 years. For 2 years, this thing has happened, and he hasn't intervened as a father nor as a king and ruler and leader. And so not only does that impact his daughter Tamar, but Absalom, who is like her brother, but like really kind of like the protector figure. And so he has these feelings of, one, like accountability, like, hey, that's my sister, I need to stand for her and get revenge for her. And this is all brewing because of David not having pulse as far as what initially was happening in his house and the impact that it had on his children for that many years. And he was just kind of trying to deal with his own guilt and wasn't able to cipher through, and you just have all this chaos and sin, getting revenge with more sin, and yeah, God just kind of lets it play out.
Yeah, it's incredible. The incident between Amnon and Tamar is sort of like one of the most despicable chapters, in all the Bible. What Amnon did to Tamar and his behavior. As a king, David didn't do anything, right? When we see how he related or didn't relate to Amnon and to Absalom and to his many sons as a father, what lessons can we take away from that? Just we're not kings or rulers, but certainly all four of us men here are parents. I'll open up the question to the rest of the group as well.
I mean, you have, so David is also trying to be an empathizer in all of this, right? And so he is someone who's murdered before. He's someone who's had people murdered to fulfill his own lust and needs. And there's this sense of like, I get it. Like, those are my sons, like they did the same stuff. I get it. And it's not okay. Like when he did it, he had to pay the ramifications of his sins and those actions. And then when his children are falling into those same traps, he didn't intervene and he's letting it play out. And so not only does it again result in disaster, but it seems like it's amplified now, because it's one of those like, hey, you should have known better. Like as a parent, you've been there, you need to step in. And when you see those things being projected and being portrayed through your children, talking about children, yeah, so.
Yeah, Damon brings up a good point. Well, I think David was being empathetic, but in some ways he was hampered, right, by the fact of his own sin, and it become very public, right? You often hear parents criticized for basically saying to their kids, do as I say, but not as I do, right? And what's implicit in that, in that charge is hypocrisy, right? So, do you think, since as Damon points out, David himself was guilty of giving into his lust and exploiting his power, then how did that hamper him in terms of how he dealt with or not, and him not dealing with Amnon?
Yeah, I'm sure he didn't want to be called or looked upon as a hypocrite. He had an obviously public sexual sin as well, and it obviously hampered his ability to set boundaries and discipline his own son in a similar type of problem. When I used to work in the ER, I would often see very, very troubled teenagers and young people. And I remember one of the parents told me once, like, this is all because I never disciplined, my child. And that really stuck with me. So even though, it is very uncomfortable and we may have the same issues, one of the major, roles of parenting is to discipline and set boundaries. Obviously not the main role, but it's an important role that we can't, avoid.
Can I ask a question here?
Yeah.
Does this first question raise a point towards the polygamy system that was in place back then versus the Christian monogamy family model a little bit, with half sister and then incest, and then the full brother takes So shows stronger relationships in a today's normal family versus that day's family model of many women and concubines and all that.
Mm. Yeah, what are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, didn't Tamar ask to marry him?
That's
So-
right. Yeah.
Yeah.
So that's a good transition into the second question. The second question reads, what dilemma did Tamar find herself in? After being violated by Amnon, why did she seek to stay within his household? And how do these dilemmas continue on to this day? So the chapter from Patriarchs and Prophets only kind of tangentially refer to this great sin, but the actual incident is presented in chapter 13 of 2 Samuel. And I'm not going to read the whole chapter, but I am going to amplify what Peter touched on. Really, what happened is Amnon schemed to have Tamar come and attend to him, pretending that he was sick, and he said, "Oh, I'm only going to be able to eat if my dear half sister Tamar personally makes cakes for me bedside." Made me think of Camless when they make the special salad right next to your table, and then basically feeds me by mouth, and basically created this situation where he was alone with Tamar, and told all the servants to leave. He's in the bed, and she's making these cakes for him. And I think at some point Tamar realized what was going on, right? And when he basically urged her to lie with him, this is what Peter brought up. Tamar says to Amnon, "No, my brother, do not force me, for no such thing should be done in Israel. Do not do this disgraceful thing. And where could I take my shame? And as for you, you would be like one of the fools in Israel. Now, therefore, please speak to the king, for he will not withhold me from you." However, he would not heed her voice, and being stronger than she, he forced her and lay with her. What happens next is what's really the most despicable, right? Then Amnon hated her exceedingly, so that the hatred with which he hated her was greater than the love with which he had loved her. And Amnon said to her, "Arise, be gone." So she said to him, "No, indeed, this evil of sending me away is worse than the other that you did to me." But he would not listen to her. Then he called his servant who attended him and said, "Here, put this woman out away from me and bolt the door behind her." Now she had on a robe of many colors, for the king's virgin daughters wore such apparel. And his servant put her out and bolted the door behind her. Then Tamar put ashes on her head and tore her robe of many colors that was on her, and laid her hand on her head and went away crying bitterly. So that's what Peter was talking about, right? Before he forced himself on her, Tamar, and I don't know, we don't know at that point whether Tamar also was attracted to or maybe loved Amnon, or whether she saw where this was going, right? In that he suggested another way that would be able to save her reputation, and asked Amnon to seek permission from King David to wed her, right? So even though they were half sisters and half brothers, apparently there could be made an exception for that. But Amnon rejected that and forced himself on her. And even after he forced himself on her, right, it's clear that she sought to stay within his household, and it would have been after the fact, but tried to be his wife. But he completely repulsed her and threw her out. So that goes back to my question, which was, what kind of dilemma did Tamar find herself in? And does that kind of dilemma still apply today? Basically, she was not just a victim of sexual violence, but she was not in control of her own destiny, right? She herself was a princess, just like Absalom and Amnon were princes, but the kind of power disparity there was striking, right? At every point in this situation, she tried to find the least damaging path, right? Whether she loved Amnon or not, she saw where this was going, and she wanted him to ask permission of David, but he forced himself on her. And even after that, she said, okay, well, now I'm violated by you and no one else is going to want me, so let me remain in your household. But he throws her out, right? So clearly she was in a situation that was starkly different from Amnon. She was the victim, but from that point on, she couldn't even live as a princess with a colorful robe in the king's palace. She had to basically take refuge at Absalom's home. And we read that she was there the entire 2 years, right? That Amnon remained unpunished. So to me, it's just a stark reminder of the power disparities. And here we are thousands of years later, and we see the same thing going on, although, not as universal and not as stark, but certainly in many countries, it's just as bad as that. Let's go on to the third question. How was Absalom similar to his father David, and how was he different?
Yeah, they were both obviously very gifted people. They were, privileged and influential. They seemed to be both natural-born leaders with really endless potential, but they were also, deeply flawed. That led to a downfall. I think the biggest contrast was that David, he truly repented, and I think his eyes were opened, and he was able to see how he was seen by God, and he really humbled himself before God. And as a result of that, I think he really had mercy towards people, or a desire at least to show mercy. Because even at the end, he wanted to spare Absalom's life. Like, he didn't want him to die. Whereas Absalom was, proud and, willing to do anything to gain more power.
Yeah. There are a few people in the Bible where there's quite a lot of detail given to their physical appearance, right? And Absalom is one of them. The Bible says that from the top of his head to the soles of his feet, there wasn't a single blemish on him. There was even this interesting thing about how full and luxuriant his hair was when you read the actual chapters in the book of 2 Samuel. Basically, what he would do is his hair would grow so thickly that he would let it grow and it'd be long and luxuriant. But at the end of each year, he had to cut it off because it was so heavy, like on his head, and it would be like, it said 200 shekels. Not quite sure how heavy that is, but it must have been pretty darn heavy.
I heard something about 5 pounds.
5 pounds of hair. 5 pounds of hair he had to cut off from his head, every year. So he was like the Brad Pitt of his age, right? He was just so striking, so charismatic, that people were naturally drawn to him. And in many ways, so was David, right? but he had a tremendous difference in his character, and I think we'll see that as we move on. Before we do, I'm going to read in the chat function. There was a comment sent in, I think, on YouTube from Jeannie Lee. She thinks Tamar did not love Amnon and that she was a full victim. I can't gainsay that. I'm going to go with what my wife's perspective is as a woman. Any other thoughts before we move on in terms of how Absalom was similar to his father David and how he was different? All right. Number 4 is David decided to flee Jerusalem rather than take a stand there to defend against Absalom's rebellion. He also sent the ark back when the Levites brought it out to him. Why was this, and what does this say about David? Hey there, Damon. Baby Damon.
It's okay, Damon. Daddy's got a talk.
I think Damon's going to take the lead on this question, and kids know the perfect timing.
All right. Question number 4. Oh, so why he didn't stay and hold his ground. I think that David understood that in his role, what he was anointed and what the expectation of God was for him as king. And so he knew that God ordained him to be king, and like it wasn't on him to try to create war and bloodshed and to destroy his city, destroy God's city. And so he trusted that God would handle that. And then with the Ark of the Covenant, he understood that it's like, this isn't my personal like good luck charm that I'm gonna just take it everywhere that I go. And this is for me only. It's like he knew that he needed to submit to the will of God, and God said that Jerusalem, like that's where the place where he will dwell. And he wasn't instructed to move him, so he understood that's like I can't move him. I can't give into myself selfish desires and think that God would just be my little trinket that I could carry around and make sure that I win. He understood that he was ordained and he's still expected to follow God's expectations, and it kind of speaks to his humility as a leader, being able to submit.
Yeah, excellent. How might, I think there are some similarities in terms of opportunities that King Saul had that he handled differently than how than David did, right? Let's keep in mind that this question focuses on a time when David was at his most vulnerable, right? Excuse me. Up until just a short time before, he was just secure. He thought that things were great with him and Absalom. All of the pomp, and Absalom would travel around the city with the 50 horsemen and soldiers and sitting at the gate. He thought that was great. Hey, my son and I are reconciled, and he's bringing honor to the palace. But then all of a sudden, it's proclaimed throughout the nation that Absalom had taken the throne, and he had even heard that one of his most trusted advisors, Ahithophel, had gone over to his side. So it must have been very tempting for David, right? He was already in Jerusalem. Absalom was outside of the city, I think in Hebron, and Jerusalem was a fortified city. it would have been easier for him to defend that, but he decided to not take his stand there. What was his consideration for? Why did what did the book say about why he decided not to take his stand in Jerusalem?
Isn't it that he didn't want to have destruction upon his people unnecessary? He was fighting between the role of a king and a father. He didn't really care for his own life. Like he said at the end, I would prefer me to be killed than you. So doesn't he look like he's sacrificing himself for the sake of his people and the city?
Yeah, that's what Ellen White speaks of. It's interesting. I find it fascinating. I really believe that the spirit of prophecy is aptly named because there are insights in the book that aren't in the actual books of the Bible, and then of course there's greater detail and so forth in these 7 chapters in Samuel that aren't in this chapter in Patriarchs and Prophets. But because in Samuel, it doesn't really talk about why David doesn't take his stand in Jerusalem, right? The word goes out, when Absalom is in Hebron and tells all of his spies to announce in all the areas of the nation that Absalom is king. But the book doesn't say why David decides to leave the city. But Ellen White says it's because he looked upon the city of Jerusalem, right? God's shining city. And it broke his heart to bring destruction and bloodshed and horror into the actual city of God, right? So even though it may have been better for him from a military standpoint or from a self-preservation standpoint, he chose to actually lead the city. So from the perspective of a true leader, Christos put his finger on it. He cared more about people he was the leader of than his own survival, right? And then Damon talked about the Ark of the Covenant, and Ellen White talks about how when the Zadok the priest brought the Ark of the Covenant, this harried, fearful group of fugitives all took heart because, hey, God's with us because there's the Ark of the Covenant, right? And they knew that, with Joshua and all the history of Israel, that Ark of the Covenant would lead the nation of people to mighty military conquest. But David sends it back, right? And what does that say about his relationship to God?
I also see again the leader here, because he doesn't want to lead people out in the wilderness with him. And just because he has the Ark of the Covenant, he wants them safe back in the city. I'm not sure about his relation with God. How does it show in this point? I just comment on the leadership again.
Yeah, Christos, thanks. Time and again, even the foreigners who, I think there were who had newly come over, there were pagans who had converted to the worship of the true God, and they were going to go with David. David said, no, look, you just arrived. I don't want you to be at risk. You go back to your own kingdom. But they said, no, we're going to come with you. We're devoted to you. Time and again, David, at his darkest hour, thought of other people. But with the Ark of the Covenant, first of all, David, I think, was a good student of history and knew, actually that calamity would arise when people used, like Damon was saying, the Ark of the Covenant as some sort of magic charm or talisman, and that it was very serious, that it had to be God's instructing the priest or the king, all right, now it's time to move my resting place, my what I'm actually occupying from the city of Jerusalem to somewhere else. And he sent it back, even though it was a source of encouragement to his soldiers and would have been a source of encouragement to himself, because he trusted that God would either protect him, and that's actually what he said. Look, either God is going to be for me, or I'm, in essence, going to receive my just deserts. And so he sent the Ark of the Covenant back. So he chose to obey God and then trust in God's ultimate decision, rather than to take even spiritual things, spiritual matters into his own hands, is what I took away from that. Let's move on to chapter 5. Question 5. David trusted in the Lord, but how was he also wise as a serpent with how he handled the situation with Ahithophel, with the advisor Hushai? What lesson do we take away from this? Is there a place for such high-level scheming in the life of a Christian? I think Peter's going to take the lead on that. Peter, if you can give a little bit more detail about this episode, what to those who are listening may not have read the chapter, what was going on with Ahithophel and Hushai?
Well, Ahithophel was one of David's most trusted advisors, and he basically turned on David and was working with Absalom now. So he was basically a traitor. And David had another very trusted advisor by the name of, what was his name? Hushai. And so they conspired, and Hushai would go over to Absalom and basically act as a spy, acting to protect David and also to let him know what was going to happen. And so, the question was, what lesson can we take away from this? And I read the text and the Bible text as well, and it wasn't really clear if this was God's plan or not. This was something that David and Hushai came up with, but I couldn't tell if it really was like guidance from God. Like, it doesn't say that they sought God's counsel or they prayed or anything along those lines. I mean, ultimately David's life was spared, but because of this plan, Absalom died, over 20,000 soldiers died. So there was incredible bloodshed from this decision. So, I just wonder, was this really God's plan? Like, if they really sought the counsel of God, there very likely was a better way.
So it's interesting because, it was this sequence especially that I was thinking about, games like House of Cards, where there's, all these complexities in the situation. There's all this scheming, all this, the one play for power being countered by another play for power, backstabbing, subterfuge. That's why I found this to be such a compelling chapter. So what's clear here is we have two of the most wisest and trusted advisors, right? Ahithophel and Hushai. And I almost, when I thought of Ahithophel, I thought of the main character from, I don't know if you guys watch House of Cards, right? But just the smartest, most scheming, most, two-faced, three-faced, characters in modern television drama. I was always one step ahead, was always scheming, and and he had flourished because I thought of that of Ahithophel, right? That's why he was so successful. But at the end of the day, it was actually about self-preservation, right? Remember, he's the one who thought ahead and realized, look, I've come over to Absalom's side, but I don't know if Absalom is going to reconcile with his father. So to really seal the deal, Ahithophel is the one who told Absalom, now that you're in Jerusalem and that you're currently in power, seal the deal and go put up a tent on the palace roof, and so everyone can see, and basically lie with every one of your dad's concubines, right? That's how scheming this guy was, to make sure that Absalom could never return and reconcile with David, so that he himself would be safe, right? So actually, the spirit of prophecy says that his plan that he gave to Absalom was a good one. He said, look, today, give me 12,000 men. I'm going to go hunt down King David while he and his soldiers are weary, and I'll go and I'll kill King David himself, right? And Hushai heard about it, and he knew that plan would have worked. And Spirit of Prophecy says, yeah, if that had happened, the only thing that would have saved David is if God actually intervened and protected him, because that plan was a sound one, right? That's how smart and cunning Ahithophel was. So God, whether he would have intervened or not in that scenario, what did happen is Hushai went in, waited until he didn't push himself into that council, because that would have looked too suspicious, but he waited, and Absalom sought out his counsel, said, what, is that a good plan, or, do you have another idea? And he was like, well, Ahithophel's plan is not good at this time. Here's another plan, right? And he came up with a plan that would appeal to Absalom's pride, right? Rather than have Ahithophel go with an advance guard of 12,000 people and get all the glory and kill King David. Why don't you go with, tens and tens of thousands of soldiers, you yourself, and then we'll fall upon King David as dew upon the grass. In other words, overwhelm him with greater numbers, and then it would be him who would have all the glory, right? Hushai knew that would appeal to Absalom's pride, and that also it would ultimately fail. In fact, Ahithophel realized that too. When he realized that his plan had been thwarted, he knew what was going to happen. He went home and he put his house in order and he killed himself, right? So David put those wheels into motion, right? By sending Hushai, instead of saying, oh, okay, you're here with me, great, come stay here and advise me. He said, I have a better idea how you can help me better. Go over to Absalom and pretend that you've gone over to his side, so that you can thwart what he knew Ahithophel's good advice was going to be, right? And it worked, right? It worked because Absalom took Hushai's advice, and that was ultimately his undoing. Okay? So what do other people think? Clearly, this is like high-level scheming, right? I mean, high-level scheming, and ultimately, it's the chess piece that David put into play through Hushai is what was able to capture or negate the chess piece of Ahithophel and put into a sequence of events that ultimately led to the military overthrow of Absalom. What do you guys think? Is that something that a Christian would ever be called to do, or is that just not God's way, and we should just go another route?
Can I see?
Yeah, please.
Let's suppose that he did not do it. The outcome was for sure Absalom killing King David and ruling over Israel. We know that he was he was brought up as a princeling that was not disciplined. He was vain. He was prideful. So would he have been a good king, as good as King David? History doesn't say, but it looks not like a good outcome. So in the grand scheme of things, like looking at hindsight, it looks like David's plan worked to the good, to the greater good in the end. And let's not forget that he was not just a simple person, a lay civilian. He was a ruler. He had to look for the better improvement of the life of all his people, not just for himself. So even if for our lives it might not look wise to be scheming and we have to be truthful, maybe for a person like David's stature, it is acceptable. It is necessary sometimes.
Yeah, I found it fascinating because when you look at the sequence of events, right? David had opportunities to improve his situation, right? One was to stay in Jerusalem, right? It's easier to defend a fortified city. But because he cared about the people in the city of God, he put himself at greater risk by leaving. Two, when the Ark of Covenant came to him, he could have had the power and the trappings of heavenly power with him, but he realized that God's principles around the Ark of the Covenant, did not give him the right to keep the Ark of the Covenant around, so he sent it back, right? But then he had a situation where Ahithophel was on Absalom's side, and he put into play a plan to thwart that advice, right? Which ultimately led to victory. So I found it fascinating because, the Bible actually, and I chose those words carefully, right? To be wise as serpents, right? But harmless as doves. I think that in this complex world, we are called to be as wise as serpents, but always within the principles of godliness, right? And always true to the responsibilities, especially as leaders or as head of our household, to protect first those that were charged, to be responsible for. But those are my thoughts.
Yeah, I don't think that.
Let's move on. Yeah, go ahead, Damon.
I was about to say, I don't think David sinned or anything, kind of to the point you said as far as calling us to be wise. I mean, he knew that his son was evil, and his plan was to keep tabs on his son, as he should have been doing like his entire childhood, actually. And he was like, you're going to do some really crazy things. And he also understood that he was humbled. He was trying to walk with God and to stay aligned with his will. And he was still anointed and ordained king by God. And so if keeping tabs on his son and just getting those reports stayed in alignment with that, then I think he was fine.
Actually, now I think about, because Peter said, did David seek God's counsel? Actually, now I think about it, when he heard about Ahithophel, right, he did cry out to the Lord. He said, may God make Ahithophel's counsel, null and void or something, right? And then shortly after that, Hushai came on to the scene and said, at least this trusted advisor is with me. And then he's like, he saw an opportunity to actually make null and void what he knew Ahithophel's good advice was going to be. So maybe there is the answer there. All right. Well, this is fascinating, but we need to move on to these other questions. Number 6 reads, Shimei, the descendant of Saul, scorned and cursed David for being a bloodthirsty man. Abishai, who was actually David's nephew, asked David's permission to cut off his head, but David forbore him not to. Were Shimei's accusations just? What lesson do we take away from how David handled this situation and with how he dealt with all of those who had turned against him after his eventual victory?
I think he was responsible. I think he, as we said before, the word we used was empathetic and understanding. And though the accusations were very misconstrued, he understood what he was feeling, where it was coming from, and there were some points that were very accurate. And I don't think the response of someone saying that you're thirsty for bloodshed is to get more blood. So I would have just proven a point. And I think throughout that entire journey of having to walk out of Jerusalem and being humbled and then coming across that, he realizes that it's like, like there were quite a few decisions, and this is just a culmination of all of those things. And it doesn't seem like he necessarily had the energy to do a lot of fact checking. But he heard him and was like, I get it. I think that was why
with that,
responsible. And I think that just helps us understand that when people are going to be upset about things, and people are going to have their own perspectives, and even in their, at the core, there is some validity and probably some truth, whether it's misconstrued or not. But like, we're never perfect and innocent bystanders in most situations. So
actually, in the book of 2 Samuel, it's interesting. All these characters reappear right after David is victorious, including Shimei. Right? He actually comes back. He's like, sorry. And basically, because he was worried that David was going to remember that, or his nephew Abishai, and basically go off like I said. There was even an interesting sequence where Mephibosheth, remember Mephibosheth, Saul's son, who the nursemaid dropped him, and therefore his foot was lame for the rest of his life, but David showed him mercy. His servant came when David was a fugitive in this sequence, and he brought him supplies and provisions. And David said, well, where's your master? And Mephibosheth, Mephibosheth is in Jerusalem siding with Absalom, right? So all these people who during this dire time of need went the other way. So afterward, when David was king again, he had justification to lop off some heads, right? But time and again he showed mercy, and actually I thought it was hilarious because Mephibosheth came, and he's like, David's like giving him an opportunity to explain himself. He's like, oh no, my servant, he lied to me. I wasn't turning on you, and basically, like David said, was he going to fact check all this stuff? Because when the servant of Mephibosheth told David, yeah, my master bailed on you, David said, all right, everything that your master has is yours now, right? So now they're both there. And so David, instead of saying, yeah, Mephibosheth, I showed you mercy when your father was trying to kill me, and then you turned on me. And right, he actually said, all right, you guys split the house. So he showed time and again when he was back in power, he actually showed mercy, right, rather than vengeance. I think that's something that many other kings certainly in this world did not do. All right, question 7. Describe the relationship between Joab and David. Joab disobeyed David's entreaty to deal gently with Absalom, right? He didn't deal gently with him. He thrust 3 spears into his heart and then threw him in a pit and covered him with rocks. He also scolded David for weeping over Absalom so publicly. Did Joab do right or wrong, and why was
that? Before I get into this, and I have to go really quick because I have to go to church here, I would just like to ask if this makes a good analogy. Does David and Absalom look like a symbolism over Jesus and the human race? Like we were slaves of Satan and we sinned so much, and still Jesus died for us, just as David wanted to die instead of Absalom's place, who sinned over him so badly.
Beautiful.
I don't know. Maybe it is a little
I
symbolism.
think so.
Now regarding Joab, David trusted him with the first column of his army, like his right hand, this one, the biggest general of his army, of whatever remnant he had at that point. And Joab, as a military leader, had to do what was best for David's king role, not his parent role. So that's why I think he had to end that threat once and for all to protect his king, not his friend and father David, but his King David. So I think it's justified in the sense of it was a military danger, and it was not the first time that he was forgiven Absalom. And there is a saying, fool me once, and you know, shame on me, shame on you, fool me twice, shame on me. So it is not a first pass. So Absalom, I think, got what he deserved, and Joab was the conveyor of that result. Right or wrong, who are we to judge? But like I said before, history shows that David was a better king than Absalom. Who says that if he was spared again, he wouldn't scheme again against his father a third time?
Yeah.
But the weeping, the public weeping of David, it was a manifestation of his love as a parent, but made his role of king show weakness. So again, Joab was trying to protect that role, and he scolded David.
Yeah, I think David
it's pretty clear. I think it's clear David himself wouldn't have been able to thrust those spears into Absalom's heart, right?
No.
Yeah. Go ahead, Peter.
Yeah, I think there was just a lot of regret that's why David was weeping so much. You know, he saw the culmination of all his failures as a parent and of his, you know, original failure with Bathsheba. And then I think it just overwhelmed him, you know. So I think that's why he was weeping so publicly.
Forgive me, I have to really go. It starts at 8 minutes. Happy Sabbath, everyone. Sorry, I can't.
It's great to see you and to
see you too.
With you. Please say hi to the family.
Thank you. Bye.
Okay, bye.
All right. Yeah, I think that Joab was, you know, very loyal, but very pragmatic as well, right? And maybe he was the only one close enough to David to be able to reprimand him, right? For he didn't say, look, you look like a wuss because you're crying. He's saying, when you cry, you're basically fighting all the people who were loyal to you and risked their own lives, right? To protect you from, you know, your traitorous son. So I think there's a place, right? David, from a place of love and regret, would never have been able to appropriately punish Absalom, right? So Joab had to be the one to do it, to really kind of eliminate the existential threat to the kingdom. So it, I think Joab had to play that role because no one else could. All right, number 8. At his darkest moment, David prayed the prayer which is contained in Psalm 3, 1-8. And have you ever felt the way David did as he prayed this prayer? And how did God deliver you? Actually, that was Christos, who unfortunately went too long. He had to leave for church, just attending Puyallup Church, which is nearby where they live now. So I'll open it up to Peter, to Damon. Jesus, I see, is also logged in. So feel welcome to join in the conversation. While you guys think about it, I'm going to read that because it's such a beautiful. It's basically one of the Psalms, right? Psalms 3, 1 through 8. Lord, how are they increased that trouble me? Many are they that rise up against me. Many there be which say of my soul, there is no help for him in God. But thou, O Lord, art a shield for me, my glory and the lifter up of my head. I cried unto the Lord with my voice, and he heard me out of his holy hill. I laid me down and slept. I awaked, for the Lord sustained me. I will not be afraid of 10,000s of people. They have set themselves against me round about. Salvation belongeth unto the Lord. Thy blessing is upon thy people.
I mean, I don't think I've ever felt the depth of the despair that David was saying at that time. But reading the story, you can see why he was praying like that. You know, he obviously was overwhelmed by his circumstances. So
yeah, there was this dual struggle, right? I mean, his threat to his actual life and limb were so real. I mean, armies were pursuing him to kill him. The betrayal was couldn't have been from anyone more dear to him, right? Clearly, he loved Absalom the most of all of his sons. But then he also had to struggle, this guilt, understanding that his own sin had set, in some ways, all these events into motion. Damon?
Yeah, like Peter said, I hope I'm never in that place where I'm feeling that way. Yeah, I like kicked out of your own home, your son doing all of that. Son's like your one son has died, and then the other son is killed, and then the other son is like, in order to get your house back, you got to kill him, and slept twice, and now all your counsel and everything turned against you, and barefoot climbing up mountains, and yeah, that's a lot. And I mean, we've all struggled in a point where it's been like, it seemed like chaos around us. It's like, what the heck's going on? But yeah, no, that it makes sense why he prayed that prayer, like Peter said.
What I find so stirring about Psalms 3, 1 through 8 is he talks about the physical danger he's in, and we are probably not going to have soldiers surrounding us trying to kill us. But sometimes life does bring situations where we feel completely attacked, right? And like enemies encircling us, or life circumstances so difficult. We also struggle, recognize, hey, we're trapped in this body of sin. So at the very end of this psalm, he says he believes that God is going to deliver him, but the closing two lines is salvation belongeth unto the Lord, and thy blessings upon thy people. So I think that the greatest struggle that David's time, right, his own physical safety was secondary to him. We saw how he told his bodyguards to go be safe, how he left Jerusalem, how he sent away the ark. But I think it was his guilt, right, his remorse that weighed the most heavily upon him. And that's why this psalm closes, right, with his grasping onto salvation. And it belongs unto the Lord, and the Lord gives it to us, without any merit on our part, because he loves us. And that's what I think ultimately distinguishes David from Absalom and from Saul and so many of these others. Okay, we're at 10:29, so we can't get to the very last chapter unless either of you have something real quick you'd like to say about what resonated with you the most.
I mean, the main thing I would say is that just life and everything we value is so fragile. You know, not just physically, but you know, one little moral slip, you know, on its surface doesn't seem so wrong. You know, David was seeking romantic love, and then it snowballed into this huge disaster. So it's just that, you know, we often think that our lives are so secure and stable, but, you know, things can flip, you know, seemingly instantly.
And just like God has love and mercy, but then also calls us to be disciplined. And so just trying to live that line where we keep our house in order. We try to keep ourselves and be aligned and disciplined with what he wants for our lives. Then at the same time, also showing mercy to ourselves and to others, like God shows mercy to us. And David did that all throughout his leadership. And I think he understood the mercy that God has shown him through his life and through all the craziness. And he knew that that's the way they should be treating others and be living and loving. And so.
Amen. All right, it's 10:31. I'm going to close with a very quick prayer. Let's pray. Heavenly Father, thank you so much for this time that we've been able to share together with each other, studying your word. I pray that we would take these lessons to heart, that we would live by your godly principles, not because it's just you want us to be in lockstep with some arbitrary rules, but you want us to live happy, healthy, joyful lives, free from the bondage and horrible consequences of sin. Ultimately, Lord, you love us and you give us this amazing gift of salvation. And so we thank you. We praise you. In Jesus' name I pray. Amen. All right. Thanks, everyone, for joining us. I'll invite everyone to join us for in-person church at 11:15, or if you're not able to join us in person, log in for the live stream, which you can find on the church email or website. Happy Sabbath, everyone. Next week, we're going to finish the book